Hello guys. In this part 3 of this series, I'm going to explain the concept of routing. So let's have a look at what we have done so far. So we have uh, triggered our component file from the index.html page, and we have displayed our component. And within the component, we have instantiated our root view and we have displayed it. So this is what we have done so far. Now, what I would wanted to do is within the root view, I wanted to display the other content which I'm actually going to display as a part of this application. So for instance, so here what we did from the index.html page, I have triggered the component. So the component is being displayed, and inside the component, the root view is being displayed here. So inside this root view, which is going to act as a container for me or going to act as a window for me, I'm going to place the multiple views which is going to contain the actual data which I'm going to display as a part of this application. So one thing what I could do is that inside this view, I can write this application logic where I can instantiate the view and then I can display it. But I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to make use of this routing concept with which I'm going to instantiate the views which I wanted, and I'm going to specify that where this view has to be displayed. Generally, inside the root view, what we will do is we'll be creating this container element which is going to act as a container which is going to have multiple views stored inside them, and according to my routing configuration, whichever the content I wanted to display, that content is going to be displayed on the UI. Now there are a couple of containers that we use mainly, which is whenever I wanted to develop a master detail application, I uses this split tab container, and whenever I wanted to develop this work list application where I'm going to display everything in a single screen, I use this nav container, or we can use this app container. So that is what we are going to use. So since what I'm developing over here is a master detail application, I'm going to make use of this split tab container. So I'm just going to create a container called split tab, to which I'm going to give the ID as ID split, or I'm going to give the ID as ID container. So I have just created a container with an ID here, which is of type split tab. So now if I go ahead and if I refresh my application, what I would generally see here is that inside my component, I would be seeing this split tab container displayed. So this split tab container was created in such a way that the one region that you see on the right hand side is the master section, and the one that you see on the light blue here is the detail section. So now here I'm going to specify that what are the content that has to be displayed as a part of this master page, and what are the content that ought to be displayed as a part of this detail screen. So this information, rather than writing the code and implementing this logic, I'm going to give this information using this router. So to specify this router, I will go to this component.js file, and here I'm going to define my routing, and I'm going to define my routing information after this root view. So I'm just going to define my routing information here, and the routing information that I'm going to provide is that I'm going to provide it as an object where I would be naming this object as routing, and inside this it contains three sections. One section is what I'm going to call it as a config section, and the other section is what I'm going to call it as a routes, which takes the value as an array, and the third section is what I'm going to call it as a targets, which takes the value as an object. So these are the three different sections of the routing. So in routing, we have these three different sections, and what this basically means. So routing is an object which is going to tell the component that how it has to do the navigation. So in which container, in which point it has to place which view. That is the information that I'm going to give it in the routing. So basically, I have three sections like config, routes, and targets. So this root section is an important one where I'm going to specify that depending upon the situation, which view I have to place and where do I have to place that particular view. So that information I give it inside the root. So I specify that what is the name of the view, and I specify that what is the type of the view, and I specify that in which location the view has to be placed, in which container the view has to be placed, and so on. So since I can give multiple definitions, this has been provided as an array where in each and every object, I'm going to give what are the content. Like I'm going to specify that what is the view that has to be displayed and where this view has to be displayed, and in which container the view has to be displayed, in that container in which section, for example in master section or in the detail section the view has to be displayed, and what is the type of the view, and so on. So likewise I specify the information for each and every navigation, and when do I wanted to display this, what is the pattern, when when I wanted to display this particular route and so on. Now there are certain things that are going to be common for all the things. For example, the type of the view, or the location where the view is available, or the container where I'm going to place the view. So whenever that particular information is going to be common for all the route which I'm going to define, then that information I can specify it over here in the config section. For example, I can specify the view type as here, like what is the view type, and I can specify the view path, like where the views are available. Then I can specify the container where all the views are going to be placed. Then I can specify the aggregation where all the view, uh, whether it has to be placed in the master section or whether it has to be placed in the detail section. So the common information which are going to be applicable for all the route which I'm going to define over here, I can specify that in this config section. Then in the target, I basically define that which view has to be displayed where. So here I will determine which is the which is the pattern that has to be triggered, and in this pattern I will be giving a target, like when this pattern has been matched, this is the target you need to trigger. So in the target I will actually tell that what is the name of the view and where this view has to be displayed. So these are the information that I'm going to give as a part of this routing. So in general, this is the important thing where according to the pattern, I'm going to determine which route has to be triggered. And once the route has been triggered, once the route has been identified, I will define the target, and in the target I will be specifying which view has to be navigated. So the common information I will be providing it in the config section. So here are some other common information which I'm going to define as a part of this application. So all the view that I'm going to develop as a part of this application are going to be XML mode of development. So rather than specifying it at each and every root level, I can specify it at the config section. Suppose here I specify the view type as XML, and later on in my application, if I'm going to write some view as a JavaScript, then in that particular case, here I can specify the type as JavaScript in the root. So whatever the one that you're going to give in the root, that takes the preference. So the default value will be overwritten with that particular JavaScript for that particular root. So in that way you can overwrite it. Then I'm just going to specify the view path where all the views are available. So whatever the views that I'm going to develop as a part of this application, I'm going to place them all under this folder called sales order dot views. So this is the folder within which I'm going to place all my views. Then what is the control which I'm going to use as a root container? So I'm just going to specify the control ID property over here, where in the control ID property I'm going to give the split app container ID, indicating that this is going to be the container for my application. Then in that container, what is the aggregation that I wanted to use as a default? So if you take the split app container, you could see that it has two aggregations which is coming from this base class called as master pages and detail pages. So what I'm going to do is that if I'm not going to define any aggregation, then I'm going to place the content in the master pages. Or if I wanted to place it specifically in the detail aggregation, I have to tell the system that okay, this is where you have to place it. So for now what I'm doing is I'm just going to specify the detail aggregation as master pages, where I'm indicating that if the aggregation has not been specified, then the system will take this master pages as a default aggregation. Then I'm going to give some other parameters like clear target as false, which indicates that if already some content is being displayed inside that container, when I'm going to display new content, whether I wanted to destroy the old content and display the new one, or I can just move it and then place it. So I do not want to destroy it, so that I can make it used for later purpose. So I'm just going to say that clear target as false. Then I'm just going to say this transition as how the navigation should happen. I'm just going to show it as show. So where I just wanted to display this view. So I have this config section over here, and then I'm just going to define the routes. So whatever the common thing, that is what I have specified so far. Then I have not specified the route and target so far. So before I specify the route and target, first what I will do is that I'm going to create a view which I'm going to call it as a master view. So I'm just defining a view here where I call this view as a master view in XML mode of development and click on finish. And I will extend the path from the component itself, where I'm going to say it as sales order dot views dot master, and the page title I'm going to give it as sales order header, or let's say sales orders. Then Coming to this controller, I do not wanted it to be inherited from the standard controller. Instead, I wanted it to be defined from my base controller. So what I will do is I'll just copy this piece of code where here I'm going to modify what I'm defining. I'm defining this master controller where the master controller is to be inherited from this base controller. And here I will change the name. Okay. So I have just created my view. Now, when I load this application, by default, the split app container has been displayed. Now I need to tell the system that in this white region, in this master pages section, I wanted to display my master view. So here, the routing, it triggers the navigation based upon the segment value, where the segment will be given with this hash value, and then it will define this, what is the segment it wanted to display. So this segment in the URL will be given with a hash value. So now when I load this application itself, I wanted this master page to be displayed here in this master pages aggregation. So here, if you see here, there is no segment value available, which means that the hash value is actually empty. So even if I'm going to give it the hash, it is going to display the same result. So the hash value is actually empty. So when this particular pattern matches as an empty, in that particular case, I wanted to display this master view in this master pages aggregation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define here in my routing logic that in the component in the routing logic, I'm going to define a route here indicating that whenever my pattern is going to be empty, which means there is no hash value at that particular point of time, I wanted to trigger this thing. So I'm going to give a name to it as I wanted to define the master view, and so I'm just giving a general name to it, and then I'm going to give a target indicating that this is the target that has to be triggered when this particular pattern matches. So in the target, I'm going to specify that uh, I'm just giving the name of the target as a master. So in the root, I'm defining that whenever the pattern matches empty, whenever there is no pattern, whenever it is empty, I wanted to trigger this target. And in this target, I'm going to specify that. So I'm just declaring a target over here where I'm going to specify that the name of the view which I wanted to navigate is master. And this master, I wanted to put it into this master pages aggregation. So I'm just going to specify that the control aggregation is going to be master pages. So even if I don't define this here at this step, the default aggregation will be considered and it will be placed into this master. But to ensure that my view is placed in the right location, I'm going to define it over here again. So now the pattern matches empty, which will force the system to trigger this thing target, and then this target is going to be triggered where it is going to tell that the master view from this location is going to be placed in this master pages aggregation of this particular container. So to specify all these things, I will actually have to initialize the router. So to initialize the router, so only when the router is active, it will take according to this pattern and it will trigger all these things. To get that, so I'm just going to specify this method get router dot initialize of. So I'm just going to get the instance of the router and I'm initializing this router. So basically it will take this routing object and it will initialize it. When it is initializing it, it will match this pattern, and in this pattern I have indicated that this is the target, and in this target I have indicated that this is the view and this is the location where you wanted to place it, and the common information I have specified in the config section. Now if I go ahead and refresh my application, you should be able to see that the routing has been triggered and the master view which I have declared, that has been placed over here in this uh, master pages section. So we have just defined the basic routing here where we haven't actually defined any other navigation so far. So that part of navigation, when and where it is required, that we will do it in the later part of our application. So for now we have initialized our router, and in that router we are given that what is the basic pattern that it has to match. So whenever nothing is there, you matches this pattern and you display this view in this particular aggregation, which has been displayed over here. So we have triggered our basic routing. Then next step, what I'm going to do is that inside this master page, I'm going to display some content where I would have to make use of, where I have to get the data from the backend system, and I wanted to display this data. So what I will do is that I will also implement the service parallelly and we will consume it over here. So in the next session, I will implement this service and we will call our service over here. So thanks for watching. See